Welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thank you for spending some time with us today. If you enjoy our conversation series, make sure you never miss an interview by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and liking us on Facebook. And be sure to visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our work across the globe. Well, today we're talking about Operation Benjamin, which works to restore the proper religious cemetery markers of Jewish American World War II soldiers who were buried under a different religion's symbol. Mistakenly representing a soldier's religion and heritage also takes away very much a piece of that person's identity. Operation Benjamin does extensive research at American military cemeteries to discover Jews who have burial markers that identify them under a different or incorrect religion. Operation Benjamin does not charge the descendants to identify the impacted soldiers and then install the correct religious headstone markers. The organization's name honors Private Benjamin Garadetsky, the first Jewish American soldier whose burial marker was changed through its efforts. He had been buried at the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial in France under a Latin cross. And thanks to Operation Benjamin, Private Garadetsky finally has a Star of David marking his grave. And here today to talk about the work of Operation Benjamin is its CEO, Shalom Lamm, who also founded the organization. Shalom, thanks for being here. It's nice to have you with us today.
Thanks, Dan. It's really an honor to be here, and I appreciate it.
Well, what remarkable work you do. One of the defining mitzvot, good deeds of being Jewish, is taking part in Jewish burial. And it is the mission, as I read it, of Operation Benjamin to ensure the Jewish World War II soldiers rest beneath a Star of David. And your work helps these soldiers to rest in peace. Now, tell us how you learned about the issue of Jewish soldiers buried under the wrong religious marker and how that inspired you to start Operation Benjamin.
So thanks for having me. And I want to say that you're referring to me, and I appreciate that. I'd love to take all the credit, but it wouldn't be fair and it wouldn't be proper. There were three of us who co-founded Operation Benjamin, and we had no intention of starting an organization. So last thing we intended to do, it really all started with the intellectual curiosity of Rabbi Dr. Jacob J. Schachter. He's a brilliant historian, a Harvard-trained PhD in history. And in 2014, he was leading a history tour to France, basically discussing medieval history, and it was around the 70th anniversary of the Normandy invasion. So just about this time in 2014, and he and his very small group, about 10 people, went to the cemetery. Those of you who've been there or have seen Saving Private Ryan know that these are incredible spaces. They're hallowed, they're holy, they're beautiful. They're incredibly sad and incredibly uplifting, all at the same time. And what you see is these incredible long rows of perfectly placed crosses, and the symmetry is broken by a Jewish star every once in a while. Rabbi Schachter was going through, he has a unique history because his father was a World War II combat chaplain, one of the liberators of Buchenwald. There's a very famous picture of him on the holiday of Shavuot leading services at Buchenwald. And Rabbi Schachter noticed, or had a feeling, I should say, that there weren't enough Jewish stars. It's just sort of this incoherent feeling, as he describes it. He didn't say anything, but a couple of months later, he and I met. My training is as a military historian, and he said to me, I just came back from Normandy. It was incredible, hallowed, beautiful, amazing, uplifting, but I just didn't think there were enough Jewish stars, just a feeling. And it bothered him very much on multiple levels. Intellectually, it bothered him. As a historian, it bothered him. And as a Jew, it hurt his heart. For some reason, it just struck a chord with me. I went home that night. It was a Saturday night. I'll never forget it. And I said, well, how many Jews are buried in Normandy? I don't have any idea. There are about 9,500 U.S. GIs buried in Normandy. 2.71% of U.S. casualties were Jews. So just do the math quickly. There should be about 260 Jews. And after a lot of investigation, there were 149. And the obvious question came up, where are the missing Jews? So we kicked around some ideas. We didn't have a clue. And we came up with some really bad theories. And it was just curious. So lo and behold, we came up with a sort of an idea like, who knows, maybe some are buried by mistake. I don't remember even whose suggestion it was. But We contacted my in-law, my son's wife's father, Steve Lamar, wonderful guy. He's a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., but an armchair genealogist, because Rabbi Schachter, smart as he is, and me, neither of us had any idea on how to do this. And we randomly picked a soldier. It was Benjamin Garadetsky, as Providence would have it. And wouldn't you know it, his family is from Zhytomyr in Russia, Ukraine, depending on the year. They settled in the Bronx, and he was a button maker. And then his parents are buried about 10 minutes from our house in Long Island. I mean, how could that be? So my wife and I went on a hot date to the cemetery, and totally Jewish cemetery. Everything about this was Jewish. And there was Benjamin Garadetsky under a cross. And it was just painful. So Steve started doing the investigation. Rabbi Schachter and I kicked around ideas. How did this happen? And lo and behold, we discovered it was a clerical error. And it was very obvious, looking 75 years later, that it was a clerical error. Obvious questions. Why didn't his parents see this and do something about it? And I think we have to bring ourselves back to World War II, back to the 1940s, late 1940s, war-torn Europe. A lot of poverty, a lot of destruction. And to get to Europe was not an easy thing. It's not like we get on a plane today, 3 hours later, we're there. That was a long boat ride. These were immigrants. There were other children. It was a very sad time. And people, quite frankly, wanted to put this behind them. And so most families never actually saw their children buried under crosses. And
how did it work? I mean, did the Armed Forces, the Defense Department, War Department, I guess at that time, just notified, they had been notified that the soldier had fallen in battle and was going to be buried in this particular military cemetery, and that was the way it happened?
Families had a choice. They could repatriate the body at the cost of the U.S. government, and about 60% of families brought those soldiers home. But 40% didn't. It actually started, interestingly, with Quentin Roosevelt in World War I. He was an aviator, the son of the president, a very beloved child who was killed in the war as an aviator. And they wanted him to be buried overseas, in where he fell with his comrades. And that started this whole concept of burying U.S. soldiers overseas. World War I, same thing. 40% of soldiers were buried overseas, 60% were repatriated. A lot of the families didn't understand what they were signing. But when you say, how was it, were they then buried, let's say, in Normandy? I think it's important to know, without getting too graphic, that soldiers were buried multiple times. They were buried where they fell in battle, a shallow grave. Then they were reburied into a collection area, reburied into a larger one, and ultimately buried in these incredible national cemeteries. But they may have been buried in 1951 or 1949 in one of these magnificent cemeteries. During that time, reburied again and again. And think about this, because this just, when I think about it, it really drives home what the era was like. Right now, we live in a wonderful time. If a soldier or 2 or 3 soldiers, or the U.S. soldiers, are killed in battle, Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, any of those, there's a congressional investigation. There are newspapers dig into it and want to know, why, how could it happen? We've gotten used to the fact that soldiers don't die in battle. And that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. But during America's involvement in World War II, 6,600 U.S. soldiers were killed every single month. Air crews were just dropping like flies. The numbers were staggering. Training accidents, combat deaths, illnesses, accidents. It was just staggering. And this is the age before computers. So all this was being done by hand. And when you have that number, those numbers of casualties, while you're fighting a world war, it's only natural that mistakes happen. I think the miracle is that more mistakes didn't happen.
Let's look at the numbers. If I recall correctly, and please do correct me if I'm wrong here, about 15 million men and women served in our armed forces during the war at one point or another, and about 500,000 Jews.
That's right,
served in the war. And how many do we estimate? How many Jews actually either fell in battle or died in some other way during the war?
11,000. So that would be 2.7%. Of the total battle casualties, or total U.S. casualties, the Americans, so 407,000 American soldiers were killed in the war, of which 11,000 were Jews.
Now, this research effort really requires a lot of expertise. So there were you and your colleagues, you've come up with this idea. You're not forensic historians. So where do you go then to dig further to find out all of the details, to look and see where there might be others.
So there's a real sense of partnership, and here it's almost an obligation, a happy obligation, to talk about the American Battle Monuments Commission. The American Battle Monuments Commission, known as the ABMC, is the U.S. government agency that's charged with caring for the foreign cemeteries of U.S. soldiers. These are people who, most of them were military themselves, and they find this as a calling. These are as dedicated professionals as you could possibly find. They are compassionate. They're very passionate about honoring these soldiers, keeping these places magnificent in honor of the sacrifice that they made. They are also an incredible resource of research and of data and of knowledge. So what we do is we have a full-time genealogist, a very brilliant woman named Rachel Silverman, who is our senior genealogist. What we did with the ABMC over time, our first conversation with them didn't go all that well. They didn't know who we were. We had no idea how they operated, and they kind of blew us off a little bit. We now have an incredibly warm, I would even say loving relationship. It's incredible to say having a loving relationship with an agency of the US government, but it really is that. We have very, very deep respect for each other. So now what we've done, we've established protocols with them on what research is germane to this. The bar to prove that someone's Jewish is very, very, very high. We're dealing with existential issues. We're dealing with permanent issues, family issues. So the primary research has to be contemporary. The evidence has to be huge. And they check everything we do. As much as they love us, they check everything we do. But that's only the first job. The second job is the request to change a headstone, even if we prove this person is Jewish 100%, must come from a family member. We can't do it. So what we need to do is seek out the descendants of men who 98% of the time weren't married and had no descendants. And we need to find sisters, first cousins, the closest possible relatives. So we have to build family trees for all of these families.
So with the passage of time, though, that must be incredibly difficult.
It is incredibly different. In fact, the way we found the Garadetsky family, the first one, is we finally knew without a doubt that he was Jewish. There was no question. But go find a family. He wasn't married. He didn't have kids. So, and his sister predeceased him. So that was really a real problem. So we ran out of steam. We thought we failed. We couldn't do it. So Rabbi Schachter and I pulled a Hail Mary pass, and we chipped in each $200 for an ad in the New York Jewish Week that said we're historians, we're looking for this family. We didn't mention anything about Normandy. And we put in an ad and asked if anybody knew these people. And 6 weeks went by and nothing happened. And then a paralegal called us and said, I once did work for a family like that, and they're in St. Louis and a member of a conservative synagogue. So I just dialed every conservative synagogue I could find in St. Louis, and we found them. And it was amazing.
You know, speaking of research, the B'nai B'rith in the New York area published a newspaper. I'm not sure exactly how frequently. It may have even been a monthly. And I've looked at the bound volumes, and this may be of some help to you. I've looked at some of the bound volumes during the war years from 41 to 45. And in those newspapers, there's news of those who fell in battle, those who received battlefield decorations, those who were injured. And there was also other information about, the war bonds drive and the role that B'nai B'rith played and so forth. It's quite interesting, actually. So I would suggest I will suggest to my colleagues that we make these volumes available to Operation Benjamin to look through them, because you may find some additional information. Now, how did it happen? I just want to go back again that these folks were incorrectly buried. Was it a matter? There were Jewish burial practices, and there were burial laws. When these guys fell in battle on the battlefield, what happened at that point going forward, where you mentioned there were shallow graves and then they were moved and so forth? What kind of practices, what kind of protocols were in place religious-wise? I'm not talking only about Jews, because there are others clearly as well. Were there those kinds of considerations given, or was this a matter of just don't have a lot of time, we have to do this and get it behind us and move on? What was going on at the time?
The answer is yes initially, and no after the first burial. First burial in battle is crude, is quick, and depending on the circumstances, isn't pretty. And there's no other way to put that. But remember, on dog tags, the reason there is a designation for religion is just for that event. Somebody's wounded, needs help, or someone is killed in battle. And so what there would be, and it's sort of a little bit anachronistic, it's kind of charming, Jews didn't have a J for Jewish, they had an H for Hebrew. During the Civil War, Jews were known as Israelites. During World War I and World War II, they were known as Hebrews. Today we're Jewish. That evolution is sort of interesting in itself. But a Jew would typically have an H on his dog tag. However, it was a very, very common practice for Jews to say, if I'm captured in battle, particularly in the European theater, this is going to be a bad idea. And they would very often put a P for Protestant, or a less often, but certainly commonly, a C for Catholic. An H was less common. And in battle, if somebody had an H, a kindly sergeant could come over before battle and say, hey, Goldstein, you need to bang that H out of your dog tag. And that's exactly what they did. Now, the question is, was that a rational fear? And the answer is, we do know historically that was unfortunately a rational fear. Jewish GIs who were captured were often separated from their comrades and were sent to the Berga concentration camp, which was a subcamp of Buchenwald. Over 100 U.S. Jewish soldiers died in Berga. They were worked to death in the mines of Berga. So that was a rational fear. And so soldiers who said, you know what, why take this unnecessary risk, paid for that often, and that's what we see very, very often, by a very well-meaning clerk or graves registration officer who says, Sugarman is got a P on his dog tag, so he's Protestant. And they would put a cross, and that just mistake would just keep compounding itself. So that was one way. Another way is, as I said, people were buried 3, 4, 5 in the Pacific. They were buried 6, 7 times. And we can see the errors. That's a clerk is overwhelmed and makes a mistake. And instead of a Star of David, he checks off the cross box. And then you just see that mistake compounded again and again. We changed 5 headstones in one day in Manila, Philippines. It was absolutely an extraordinary event. And I must say, the families were there. U.S. ambassador was there. The Israeli ambassador was there. The Jewish community of Manila came out in force. It was just magnificent. We had 2 prisoners of war who both starved to death in Japanese internment camps, who were there, and we changed their headstones. There are so many circumstances that involved these young men, and the families never went to Manila to visit them. It never happened. So when we go there and we say Kaddish over a headstone, that's the first time in 78 years that the Jewish community came and said Kaddish with a minyan at this gravestone. It's incredibly moving.
There's a photograph, and the New York Times done a really fine story about your work. There's a photograph of a family coming to the gravestone. Tell us about the families. This is incredible. It's you're creating, in a way, a reunion of sorts with their relatives. What has the reaction been when you approach them about this?
Very often there's a little bit of a sense of disbelief. You're talking about someone who, and I think most people find this surprising. Most of the families know very, very little about that soldier. They know that mom's brother was killed in the war. But when they say, Mom, tell us about your brother, very often the reaction is, Mom broke down in tears and couldn't talk about it. And so the kids didn't want to cause mom pain, so they didn't ask because it was so painful. So there's generally this huge disconnect between the person they've heard about in this sort of mythic fog and the flesh and blood person who was there, who was heroic, who gave all, who did everything. What we do, because our research is so deep, we end up introducing these families to this long-lost relative. Let me tell you about 3 families that I think will illustrate the great gamut that this reaches. One is a soldier who just changed his headstone 3 weeks ago, Private Everett Satius. Corporal Everett Satius. From Sephardic heritage. His family is one of the oldest Jewish families in the United States. His relatives fought in the Revolutionary War. They came to America 5 years before George Washington was born. His family were founders of the New York Stock Exchange. The famous George Washington letter about prejudice in the United States was written to his great-great-great-grandfather. It's just unbelievable. And a very poignant story. The family had the flag under which this young man who was killed in the Battle of the Bulge, he was a Columbia Law School graduate, they had the flag. And they sent it to us to take to Europe with us, which we did. And the superintendent of the Luxembourg American Cemetery, where he's buried, had this brilliant idea. There's this huge flagpole that adorns, sort of graces the entrance to the Luxembourg American Cemetery, where George Patton is buried. And he decided that let's fly the Seychelles flag for that day while we do this headstone change. It was just unbelievable. And this young man who represented the family was a descendant who just got his PhD in history from Cambridge University, spoke eloquently, beautifully, movingly about this young man who was killed in the Battle of Bulge, who was incidentally an only child. So that's one example. But there are other examples that are very different. We had Barbara Belmont, who was at the Lorraine American Cemetery. She was 3 years old when her father was killed in battle. He was a young man, entrepreneur, wealthy, didn't have to go, went willingly, was killed within 30 days. And she spent a lifetime with this incredible absence in her life. And as she said poignantly, and I hope I make this through without breaking up myself, is this was the first time in her life, 76 years after her father was killed, where she could do something for him. I mean, what a feeling! What an extraordinary feeling! And I would see a different level of that is Mary Ellen Miller, 85 years old, wonderful, spry, tough woman, whose half brother, Lieutenant Kenny Robinson, buried in the Ardennes, was shot down. The only crew member of his B-17 who was killed. And she has spent years trying to get this headstone changed. In 1996, she discovered that he was buried under a cross, and we managed to do it. We just know how to do this. And to see her there and say, wow, what I did for my brother Kenny was staggering. It's an amazing, amazing experience. And, you know, the ceremony is beautiful. It was created by Rabbi Schachter, and it's very, very beautiful. It ends with a United States military officer. In each case, this time it was a colonel, who goes over to that grave and does what's called a slow salute. And it could be to a private, to a corporal, or to a major. And he just raises his hand, holds that salute, lets it down very slowly. It's as moving a sight as you can imagine.
So do you go over for all of these change of markers?
You bet.
Do you go to each one?
You bet. I do, Rabbi Schachter does. In this last one, where we changed 7 headstones in 4 cemeteries in 3 countries in 2 days. We had 45 people there. 18 of them were family members, but all the others were just people who wanted to say thank you, who felt it important to go and say, I'm there for you. We have not forgotten that sacrifice. And it's very moving.
Well, there's certainly a Beshert element to this, insofar as that you were doing this while siblings or children are still here, because as we move on into this century, that's unfortunately not going to be the case. So there is, I suppose, that measure of closure for these families, as you've said, which really relates to time.
And I'll tell you a wonderful story. You really nailed something really important. Normally, our first soldier, Benjamin Garadetsky, it took us over 2 years to get that approval and for the whole process to work. Now, on average, once our research is completed, that's a very heavy lift, but once it's completed, we generally have about a 35, 40-day approval period. The ABMC works with us. They're magnificent. But our record is 4 days. Let me tell you what happened. There was a soldier who was killed in Corregidor Island in the Philippines, who was probably one of the very first American soldiers killed in the Pacific Theater. And his name was Corporal Sam Cordova. Sephardic heritage. When we did the research, we discovered that he had 7 brothers who lived to adulthood, 5 of whom fought in the war, and he was the one who was killed. His younger brother, Harry, was 99 years old and alive and living in Florida. I mean, that's an unbelievable find. So we contacted Harry. You can imagine what kind of call that was. I have the privilege of contacting the families. It's really very fraught. And we created a very instant, very, very tight and intense bond over this. Well, the story is that when they found out that Sam was killed, that Corporal Sam Cordova was killed in battle, his parents were Turkish immigrants who came to America and didn't read English. So he had to go and read the telegram to his mother. And as he says, you can imagine that was a very tough day. The American Battle Monuments Commission, recognizing that he was 99 years old, said, wow, let's do this really quickly. They put everything aside, focused on our research. We got a 4-day approval. And the headstone change took place in Manila during COVID on the 79th anniversary of his death in battle. And everybody moved heaven and earth to make sure this happened. And it's just extraordinary. The end of the story that just shows the American Jewish sacrifice is Harry's brother named a child 2 years later after Sam, who was killed, and he was Sam Cordova. Sam Cordova was very athletic, joined the Marine Corps, and he was killed as an aviator in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So 2 Sam Cordovas, 2 generations killed in war, Jewish Americans for our country. It's just an extraordinary story.
Are families now beginning to come to you?
They are, and it's really exciting. Not only are families coming to us, I'll tell you, one of the headstones we changed in Lorraine, France, this past mission was Major Jerry Pappert. The way we got Major Jerry Pappert, it wasn't the family that came to us. It actually was the superintendent of the cemetery's wife. Every morning takes a walk, in the silence of these cemeteries. It's hauntingly beautiful. And she looked down and she said, there's Major Pappert. I just read a book where he features prominently. He's Jewish. Why is he under a cross? And she contacted us. Well, that was really something special. And by the way, she was there for the change of this cross, this headstone, and it was quite magnificent.
What about women war casualties? Have you come up with the names of women who might also have been killed in battle?
You can imagine it was much more rare, certainly in World War II. Most of the women who were killed were nurses. There are some very famous. The first nurse killed in France, in the U.S. Armed Forces. Just forgot her name this moment, which is actually killing me. But she's buried in Boston. She was repatriated and buried in Boston. I think when women were killed, it was a huge big deal. It was so unusual, and therefore the mistake probably wouldn't have been made because there would be so many eyes on this event. And so I don't suspect that we're going to find such a case, but if we do, I'm sure that will be pretty big news.
Well, you mentioned the Sam Cordova who fought in Vietnam. What about Korea and Vietnam?
World War II was the last war where soldiers were buried overseas.
So this is not this issue will not come up more likely than not.
It'll go in the other direction. We have already identified a World War I soldier who is mistakenly buried under a cross. We suspect now that the total number of World War I soldiers who we will pursue is about 300 or so, maybe a little more. And astonishingly, the records are good enough, and our genealogist is brilliant enough, that we think we'll have some success here. Tracing the families clearly is going to be a challenge. But as long as we can build a proper family tree, we should be able to do this as well for World War I soldiers.
This is all not easy. A lot of research, a lot of painstaking research. And then there is the whole idea of going over to the cemetery abroad, having the marker changed. How are you funding this? What is your game plan? What is your game plan going forward to build the effort that you're engaged in?
It's a great question. We don't take money from the families. We won't do it. We think there's an ethical line that is good and healthy by separating ourselves from funding from families. They're called descendants of honor, which is sort of a beautiful way of referring to these families. And so we depend on private donations. Because we're a very, very, very focused organization, we're not doing other things. We don't have extracurricular activities. We're not building buildings. Our goal at the end of the day is to do our task, get this done for these soldiers, make sure that we've done a good job, and then fade into the night. we want to capture every single one of these soldiers that we can, and then basically go away. So we're depending on the goodwill of people who want to say thank you, goodwill of people who recognize that sacrifice like this is extraordinary, is so heroic, it needs to be recognized. And so it's private donations that keep us going.
Well, this is, of course, a great subject for a film documentary. Is there one in the works?
Without spilling the beans, I think there is. We've been contacted by a number of companies, and I suspect it is. And yes, it's interesting. When I saw Apollo 13 the first time, I said, how could that be fascinating? And it was, of course, a magnificent movie. And right. I think you'll find the same thing here. There's a lot of detective work. Calling the families, very, very dramatic every single time. There's a lot of drama here. And then, of course, the ceremonies themselves, listening to the families speak about their loved ones when they see that cross changed is very, very dramatic. I would like to add, and I think it's very, very important, I think we need to recognize that when we replace a symbol and we put up that Jewish star, it is a point of incredible pride that we have, that everyone is around us is having, the family has, but we are removing another symbol. And I think it needs to be said that we need to honor that symbol. And we coined a phrase that cross has been a silent civil sentinel guarding that soldier for these many decades. And I want to make it clear that we have utmost respect for what has taken place, the love that the people who run these cemeteries have had for all of these soldiers under whatever symbol. And we honor that, we respect that. So while we make that change, we also make it clear to those around us that we respect the cross that's being removed, but the appropriate symbol for this soldier is a Star of David.
Well, you put it well, Shalom. I think you referenced the woman who walked through, every morning took the walk through the cemetery. I know these are incredibly peaceful places, and to do the mitzvot that you've done here by correcting this mistake for us, of course, for everyone who lost their life in World War II, all of the other wars. It's not only millions, hundreds of thousands who have unfortunately gone this way, but each one has an individual story. That's the important thing. And then within our own community, not to leave them behind, not to leave the few hundred behind that had this issue occur, really is really a tremendous accomplishment. So we thank you for that. We praise the work of Operation Benjamin. We hope that you'll keep us posted about progress with the documentary when it comes out. And thank you very much for being here today and sharing the important and meaningful work of your organization.
Thank you, Dan. It's a real pleasure. And I have to say, every soldier we deal with, every family, it's just such an incredible honor to be, for fate having put me in this position, Rabbi Schachter in position, Steve Lamar, Rachel, all of our officers who really dedicate a lot to getting this work done. And it's a great honor for all of us. Thanks for having me.
Well, our thanks to Shalom Lamm for explaining the mitzvot carried out by the work of Operation Benjamin today. And thank you for tuning in to this conversation with B'nai B'rith. If you enjoyed this interview, make sure you catch all of our programs by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and liking us on Facebook. And be sure to visit our website, b'naibrith.org, to learn more about our important work. For my guest, Shalom Lamm, and on behalf of B'nai B'rith, I'm Dan Mariaschin. Join us again soon.